Hi, it's Craig and Richard here. Welcome to the Week 2 feedback video. Great to be with all our learners again.
Yep.
And an interesting week. And this, we said at the outset, is a more challenging or to some extent more advanced sort of course. And many learners are coming to mindfulness for the first time. And, it's not surprising that some are finding it a little bit difficult and challenging. And we do very much just want to reiterate that we go at our own pace. We're gentle, we step back from something we're finding it difficult, and certainly if we're having any issues that we're really concerned about, mental health issues and so on, that we make sure that we get some more personalised care and attention from a healthcare provider is an important thing to mention as ever.
Yeah, it's good advice, Craig, definitely.
Yeah. So lots of interesting things here. Developing compassion and empathy, and
Yes.
compassion fatigue, empathy fatigue, which is which. And
Well, it's an interesting thing, isn't it? The research showing more and more that what we've historically called compassion fatigue is actually empathy fatigue. That the empathic resonance we get when we're empathising too much in an unmindful way can actually cause us problems. And to be empathic in a mindful way, which is what a lot of our learners are exploring this week, means that we don't get so caught up in perhaps the stories or the emotions of other people. So it sort of makes that empathy a lot healthier. And then, of course, compassion, where we have that wish or even the action to actually alleviate the suffering in the other person. The research is showing activates different parts of the brain and can actually be a lot healthier.
Yeah, so that sense of feeling goodwill for others, that sense of... And mind you, we can all relate to what somebody's experiencing, because we all know what it feels like to be angry or afraid or anxious and so on. So we certainly connect with the suffering of others because it's a part of the universal human experience.
Yes.
But in the way that we learn not to get caught up in our own suffering, it makes it easier not to be aware of, but not caught up in the suffering of others.
That's right. Yeah. And of course, some people often find that it's actually easier to be compassionate for others than themselves. So sometimes it's an interesting practice. And certainly when we bring mindfulness to it and start to notice perhaps how uncompassionate we are with ourselves and others, the costs of that, and then start to explore what it means to be more compassionate. It's it brings up a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
It pushes buttons, but it also teaches us a lot.
Yes. So the witnessing in a non-judgmental way is really important. So that sort of and learning to be at peace with, at ease with, in the presence of discomfort. Very simple principles. Not so easy in practice.
No. Nor is assertiveness, Craig. That brought up a lot for people.
Yeah, it's interesting. And we use a word like assertiveness, and we could understand that in lots of different ways. Imposing ourselves on others, almost in a dictatorial kind of way, or as assertiveness, something quite different, more enlightened form of assertiveness.
Yeah.
Where it's not a reactivity, but a responsivity.
I think that's a great distinction: responding rather than reacting.
Yeah, in the one we're maybe on automatic pilot and something's pushed
and
our
driven
buttons.
by our emotions, perhaps.
Yeah, driven by emotions where the discernment is not getting a look in, and maybe on automatic pilot, reacting in a habitual way without perhaps awareness. So assertiveness in a mindful way might be quite a different thing to what we might be habituated to think of it as. So it was interesting. The quiz, of course, was not actually a quiz. It wasn't suggesting to people that there's one right answer, but that
I think quizzes themselves push buttons for some people, don't they?
They do.
Multiple choice takes you back.
Yes. So it was really those questions were just really about stimulating discussion.
Yeah.
And not trying to suggest there's one right answer, because in many ways you could make an argument for all of them, really.
Yes.
Yeah.
Some great discussion amongst learners about mindfulness for parents and carers, very useful strategies, things that are helping them a lot.
Yeah, and so important. And of course the next generation coming along to be more mindful than the one before would be a pretty useful thing to aim for, I think. Yeah. Difficult relationships came up, and not surprisingly. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of people have started to notice some of the challenges or the difficulties in their relationships. Some learners have even started to let go of relationships, but there's often a guilt that can come with that. But I guess if you think about it, it's probably better not to surround ourselves with people. If we can't maintain some sense of mindfulness and balance and be compassionate, perhaps after a while it might be better to spend a little less time around people like that, particularly if they're friends or colleagues and people that we have some choice around.
And I think too, sometimes learners will feel, whoa, wait a sec, if I was getting the mindfulness right, I wouldn't experience guilt, I wouldn't experience anger, I wouldn't experience resentment from past hurts and so on. And let's be a little bit gentler with ourselves, because the mindfulness will probably make us more aware of
Yes, it will.
patterns of guilt or resentment and so on, or, haven't forgiven somebody. But if we can just bring a kind of mindful awareness to that, to just notice the presence of it, to just start to notice the effect of it, to notice the effect on how we relate to ourselves or to others, that's a really important part of mindfulness. So to notice those things in a non-judgmental way, to get curious about them, to see, what's the effect on myself and my life, we can start to make a more informed decision about, well, what am I going to feed or not feed?
Yeah, so to acknowledge that they're human, to have those kinds of reactions, but also to be more aware of whether we're feeding them or not. I think that's probably a good approach.
Yeah, sometimes I think we've got to be superhuman and not experience these things. And I'm not doing mindfulness right if I'm experiencing any of this stuff, when we can be mindful of
That's right. Yeah.
these things.
And Craig, does it take effort to let go? This was a big question that came up.
It's funny, isn't it? Like if I had a hold of a rope and somebody's pulling
You're holding on really tight, and
that's right. And it's like, what do I got to do to let go? Well, the letting go is not a doing. What we actually stop doing is holding on.
Yeah, so the holding on is the doing, and perhaps we can notice that holding a grudge, holding on to a resentment, holding on to some story.
Yeah, like the questions come up. So, letting go. Well, how do I do it? Yeah. Well, it's actually a non-doing. It's like we stop doing something that we're already doing, which is holding on to things. So it's really just a release. It's there, but we release the attachment to it. And when we get the feel of it, and mind you, some of those attachments are pretty strong, and don't let go very quickly.
It's difficult to be mindful around people if we're triggered by them, if they're exhibiting bad behaviour or trying to manipulate us, said a few of our learners. And of course, again, that's human to have those kinds of reactions, but perhaps to notice them, notice the effect of them.
Yes.
And also, let's reiterate that mindfulness isn't about allowing bad behaviour. This idea of acceptance and openness and non-judgment, we don't allow people to hurt us or abuse us. But it's about perhaps letting go of some of the reactions and the judgment so that we can respond rather than react, as you were talking about before, and perhaps accept that we need to act, to say something, to establish some boundaries, to be assertive.
Yes, because acceptance, again, could mean many different things, but people sometimes think, is it about apathy?
Yes.
Is it about neglect or something?
And it's not. Mindfulness is not about neglect, apathy.
Yeah.
No.
Knowing when to act and when to keep our peace is a very important thing.
What did help was the realisation that if people are difficult to be around, then they're probably quite unhappy. Just like when we're difficult to be around, we're unhappy.
Yes, that's right.
And so realising that perhaps compassion arises, we become less reactive.
Yes. Yeah. And the self-awareness, somebody comes up and like a young child very quickly learns where the parent's buttons are and starts to press them and in various sequences and produces various results and effects. And just to be aware that the buttons are being pressed. Yes. Oh, that's interesting. Look at that. There's reactions arising. That's a part of being mindful.
That's right. Lovingkindness, Craig?
Yes. This, again, is an interesting and to some extent quite a challenging practice. And mind you, again, participate at our own pace. Some have found it difficult initially and an easier practice to come back to perhaps on a second go.
A lot of our repeat learners have said that initially they found it really challenging. They skipped it, in fact, but they've come back to it on subsequent runs and eventually have found that once they engage with it, it can actually be very powerful and helpful.
Yeah. And, some sort of felt, is this sort of strange, sending some sort of good wishes off into a void as if we're going to change the quantum structure of the universe or something else. But what we're actually doing when we're practicing this is starting to work on our own neurology, the wiring of our own brain, our own amygdala, our own emotion centers and so on. So when we practice cultivating, now this is a kind of an adaptation of principles of how we use attention, because when we feed attention to an angry thought, those circuits in the brain then we experience anger or resentment are getting a workout. They're getting reinforced until they become like, a superhighway in our brain. And so practicing cultivating giving our attention to a different thought, consciously cultivating that, creates other pathways and perhaps all pathways that have been very much reinforced get pruned back. like there would have been some pretty major highways in ancient Rome and got a lot of traffic along them, but eventually those were stopped being used, and pretty soon they've grown over and they're not there. And it's a little bit like that with our brain.
It is.
Choosing what thoughts that we ultimately want to cultivate. But we shouldn't be surprised that resistance comes up to them when we...
No. And mindfulness is really about cultivating presence and openness and an attitude of kindness and friendliness to ourselves. And the loving kindness really just emphasises that attitudinal component.
Yes.
So it's related to mindfulness in that way.
Yes. Yeah, very good. All right, so thank you. That's about time to finish for this week. And so next week we're going to be looking at a range of things like self-compassion, especially in the face of difficulties.
It's another challenging week, actually.
Yeah, that's right. And so be curious and be interested, and as we said before, to go at our own pace. And mindfulness in the presence of pain. It could be physical or emotional pain, but how can mindfulness help us with those things? So we'll look forward to being with you next week.